Good evening and welcome to Inside Government, a show produced for the spring 2022 semester here at Cayuga Community College and broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon, Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, better known as ARMA, as well as Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. We are delighted to have in the studio today with us tonight Cayuga County Sheriff Brian SCHENCK to give us a community update on what's going on over at the department. He is in his fourth year of his first four-year term. He is up for re-election this year. There is, as of today, to the best of our knowledge, no opponent for him. His department has about 160 employees that cover road and boat patrols as well as the county jail. And we're going to be talking about both of those items in different aspects. The first one dealing with the state legislature's passage in 2019 of bail reform, as it's been called by some. Called by others something else, that was implemented in 2020, and while there was a slight correction of some of the items in mid-2020, there are law enforcement officials as well as non-law enforcement officials asking for change. Among the law enforcement officials is our guest tonight, and those of the non include not only the Cayuga County Legislature, but the Mayor of Fulton. We'll talk to Sheriff about that, the recently approved purchase of body cameras for his deputies, and the new $750,000 grant from the United States Department of Justice to help inmate transitioning at his facility on County House Road. Welcome back. It's great to have you back in the studio.
It's great to be here, Guy. Thank you. I appreciate it.
How are you doing? How is your family?
We're doing very well. Thank you.
So you're through the worst of COVID now. How are your, you had some cases, I'm assuming, in the jail facility. I'm assuming some deputies came down with it. How have you all transitioned?
We're doing okay, but like any entity, we had a number of struggles with COVID, with staffing, and as you said, unfortunately, we did have some inmate outbreaks, but I'm happy to report that we didn't have any serious illness, and everybody's doing fine. So as of today, we don't have any COVID within our facility or any staff out due to it, so we're doing great. And
I know since, if you don't mind me getting personal here, since last time I had you on, which I think we had you on, which was last year, you have become a grandfather.
I am, four months ago, so I'm very excited about that. I'm a grandfather. I don't quite feel old enough to be a grandfather, but I am, and I'm pretty.
Well, your wife is not old
it.
enough to be a grandmother. Tell Dee Dee I said that. So,
we'll do that.
But Grayson is doing well and healthy, and all the stuff that goes with that.
Very well. We're very proud of him. Proud of our daughter.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about bail reform, because that's what kind of generated this. In part, you wrote a letter or a column in the Citizen recently about this, but there's been some activity within the law enforcement world about how things really need to change from your perspective. Before we get to change, let's talk about what it is, because I don't know that everybody has paid attention to the details. So in 2019, the legislature, and this was mainly a change in the Senate, Democrats took control of the Senate, new leadership changes there. They did what was called bail reform. What did that include?
The reforms that were put in place by the state legislature and ultimately signed by the governor actually eliminated cash bail for a number of criminal offenses prior to 2020. For any offense, if a local judge or any magistrate believed that monetary bail needed to be set on a defendant that was charged with a crime, they could set that bail on the defendant to ensure their return to court.
So removed from that right now are misdemeanors and non-violent felonies.
Correct. Most misdemeanors and non-violent felonies.
Okay.
The judges can no longer set bail in those cases.
So they have lost all discretion in this.
They have in those cases.
There are occasions, though, if somebody runs up a large series of, I want to say this correctly, there are ways they can get around it, but it's very cumbersome. Am I correct on that? I thought I read it in a Palladium Times story. It gets very cumbersome.
It does. So if a defendant fails to appear a number of times for criminal appointments that they have, there are ways that judges can set bail in those cases for some of the minor offenses. But like you said, it is not an easy thing to do for our local judges.
So, but there's a disproportionate burden on law enforcement and the criminal justice system to make sure those people are retained with bail. Am I correct at that?
There is. We have to collect a lot of data now and phone numbers and things for the judges so that they can reach out and give reminders to defendants in those cases. And certainly if those individuals that have been charged with offenses are not returning to court as they're supposed to, it creates, a lot of work for us to continually go and find them after warrants have been issued for their return, and we're seeing that. We're seeing an increase in the number of bench warrants that have been issued so that we can return.
Because people just don't show up.
Correct.
I'll get to the escalation first. Let's go back to originally. The original premise as it was sold to the public was that cash bail disproportionately impacted poor people. That was the argument, am I correct?
Correct.
Do you agree with that general premise?
I don't agree with that in general. I know that there was an incident at a facility at Rikers Island in New York City where an individual was charged with a petty offense. I believe it was a misdemeanor larceny offense, and he was in the facility. He was in the Rikers prison for quite some time on a low cash bail amount, and he didn't have the means to get bailed out, and this started the discussion. I think generally, I don't think this was a problem across the state. I'm certain that there were cases where that was the case, but I don't think that it warranted an overhaul of our entire system to the degree that it's been done, because I don't see this as an improvement in our bail system. I see us as having gone backwards. But I'd like to be very clear that I would never want to see an individual incarcerated or unable to get out of jail due to the fact that they didn't have the monetary means to do that. So I think that we do need to make sure that those things never happen.
Did you see did you see any cases, forget a lot, did you see any cases where that was an issue in Cayuga County?
Nothing here locally. In fact, I know that our staff, our supervisors, and me as sheriff have a responsibility to make sure that those things don't happen. If we see a case that falls through the cracks and somebody's stuck in jail for an extended period of time because they don't have the means to make cash bail, I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're notifying the district attorney's office and defense attorneys that, hey, this is a problem, we need to make sure this doesn't happen. But I don't ever remember seeing a case like that.
And I don't want to get too technical, but what do you define as cash bail?
So cash bail would be any monetary amount that a judge would set on a defendant to ensure their return to court. So that could be anything from, I've seen it as low as $1 to $1 million that a defendant.
But in $1 million, you would most likely go to a bail bondsman.
Correct. They could go to a bail bondsman, or
but if it's $100 for an appearance ticket, it's write a check. I don't even know if you can write a check.
We don't take a check for it. Would have to be cash.
Okay.
Or credit card.
Or credit card. Yeah.
So
Visa and MasterCard all welcome here.
Accepted anywhere.
So let's talk about what the impact of the change has been. So as far as you're concerned, since 2019, there was a change in just the whole system.
There was a complete change in that a number of crimes, specifically misdemeanors and what the state considers nonviolent felonies, were eliminated from the list of offenses that judges could set cash bail on. So judges are unable to set bail.
So that compounded the issue.
Correct. It made it worse, and there was an amendment to the original law as it was set forth in mid-2020. The state legislature and governor realized that it had gone too far. They did add some criminal offenses to the list of offenses that cash bail could be set on, but it hasn't gone far enough. We need to continue amending that.
So, again, from reading the piece by you, I know the county legislature, we'll get to that in a second, passed a resolution. The mayor of Fulton, other people have talked about this. Has it created a revolving door where people get arrested? You know, I don't want to keep pointing to the Palladium Times, but they profiled two people who seem to be revolving. Mm-hmm. And is that what you're seeing? Is somebody is arrested, let's say hypothetically, on a Monday, and whether it's Friday or the following Monday or 2 weeks from now, they're back, and then they're back, and they're back, because it seems like it's unlimited number of times they can get released.
It is. We have seen some of those cases. I won't say that it's the majority of cases, because it certainly isn't, but we have seen some of those cases, and those cases are the ones that greatly concern me. You know, when we're putting individuals back out onto the street that are putting our community and public safety at risk, it shouldn't be the case. They shouldn't be allowed out.
So on that particular case, the issue is that, do you see an escalation in these types of crimes? So, you know, again, I'm going to give you examples that are most likely very poor, but starting off with shoplifting, and then, and some of this comes to mind because of the opioid and heroin, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, but it goes from shoplifting to petty larceny to breaking and entering, and just it escalates. Are you seeing that? Because to me, bail seemed to be also serve as a deterrent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a deterrent, and we have seen that. And if you look at the statistics from across the state, especially in 2021 and 2020, you've seen a sharp increase in the number of homicides. You've seen a sharp increase in the number of violent offenses committed with firearms and in violent.
And those are people who often had been arrested for something else and released?
That is the case. There's not a coincidence there that's happening, and certainly there's other factors that weigh into that, but as far as bail and bail quote-unquote reform goes, it certainly has had an impact in that, and it's not a coincidence. But we're seeing some concerning statistics and things here locally, but statewide, certainly, it's
So
had a
what
negative
concerns you
impact.
locally on that front?
For me, one of the biggest things that concerns me is when people are struggling with addiction, and as you know, that's something I'm passionate about. When it comes to opiate addiction and addiction in our community, it used to be the case that if somebody was, committing petty offenses to support that habit, continually committing them over and over again, ultimately in many cases they would wind up, in jail with some bail set to ensure their attendance back in court because they weren't coming to court. But we were providing life-saving treatment for those individuals in jail for not only the addiction.
So that doesn't exist now?
No, it doesn't. Not only for addiction, but for mental health needs. Now we don't have the ability to do that because these individuals, are being released because bail is not an option for a judge. So they're out there committing those crimes, ultimately putting our community at risk and feeding their addiction.
I know we're going to have Monica Selvage on Thursday to talk about HEAL and the whole heroin issue, but I wanted to ask you, are you still seeing, again, whether they're petty crimes or breaking and entering, other types of more serious crime, with people trying to get money to feed their addiction, whether it's heroin or opioids? Is that still a major issue?
Absolutely, it is a serious issue, and I'm sure that you'll get into that when you speak to Monica Selvage with the Healing Community Study. But I can tell you, last year we had 277 overdose cases where law enforcement and emergency responders had to respond, and that was up sharply from the year before. And in 2020, those stats were up sharply from 2019. So it's not a coincidence. I believe wholeheartedly that bail reform and some of these other quote-unquote reforms are impacting our ability to deal with some of those types of cases. So not only was bail reform bad for the community, it's putting our community at risk, it's bad for some of the very people that it was designed to protect.
So you're also seeing a lot of people just skip on their appearances. What does that do for your resources? Because I'm assuming if somebody's issued a bench warrant, you got to go start. Well, first of all, do you start looking for them, and is that your responsibility?
If we have a warrant issued that directs us to locate a defendant and bring them before the court, then certainly that's our responsibility, and we have to, immediately start working on that. So it has made more work for us in trying to execute those warrants and make sure that people are coming back to court. And obviously for our jail, we have a CAP court, centralized arraignment court, where if
What's a CAP court? Sorry.
Centralized arraignment part is a
Okay.
CAP court, and what that is a local detention. It's a short-term detention so that our law enforcement officers, including our deputies, New York State troopers, and the Auburn Police Department, if they do arrest somebody on a bench warrant, if somebody's failed to appear, or if they arrest somebody on a new charge, they're able to come and bring that person to our jail temporarily, and then a judge will come and do the arraignment of that individual twice a day at our jail. So it's increased the workload for our people at the jail to watch these individuals until they're arraigned as well.
And I hope I don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask the question anyway. So you pick somebody up on a bench warrant. You bring them to the CAP. Judge sees them. What happens to them then most often? Are they given another appearance ticket?
In many cases, they are released, and I just looked at some of
So it's a circle.
It is, and I just looked at some of the data before I came today. I thought we might talk about this, but last year and in 2020 in our centralized arraignment court, 62% in both years of the individuals that were brought to jail to be arraigned were immediately released upon their arraignment. So 62%.
Based on the laws that were passed in 2019 and 2020.
Some of those, yes.
Okay.
And there's other circumstances. I won't say all of the cases are due to
Okay.
bail reform, but in many cases, those individuals, the 62% of people released at the arraignment, were due to the new bail reforms.
So you and other law enforcement, there were obviously changes in mid-2020. They did not go far enough as you and others had wanted. What would you like to see changed?
I believe that we can always be looking at our criminal justice system and reforming it. I think back in 2019 that there were some reforms that could have been made. Certainly they went too far, but I think looking at where we're at now, I would advocate that we just give the judges discretion to either, lock somebody up and incarcerate them if they determine that they're a public safety risk, or if there's a flight risk determination that can be made. I would be okay actually with eliminating all cash bail. Just give the judge the discretion to determine, if there is evidence to support that this individual is a threat to our public safety, or that they're not going to return to court, that they have the ability to hold them.
And in your column, you base that view based on state law right now that says you have that ability to do that.
Well, the state law right now does not give the judge the ability
No, but the original intent of bail, and you went into some depth about some history here, that there is some discretion in the law that discretion relies with the courts, not necessarily with a legislature to change the rules.
In my opinion, it should absolutely fall with the court. I don't believe that any cookie cutter solution, as I said in my article, is going to work for bail reform. I think a judge has to have the discretion to analyze each case individually and make a determination as to whether bail is appropriate.
The county legislature, Mr. Shea, who's a new member of the legislature, represents just south of the city, Scipio in that area, put forward a resolution earlier I guess last month, because we're on March 1st. What was his resolution?
His resolution was to give judges, have the state give judges more discretion in addressing the bail reform laws, and it also dealt with discovery issues as far as the information that has to be provided by law enforcement agencies and the district attorney's office to defense counsel relative to criminal cases.
And that was a separate issue that got commingled with this.
It was.
But I'm saying at the state level, not necessarily Mr. Shea's resolution. He's addressing both issues. But part of this whole, again, I'll use the word reform back in 2019, changed a lot of things, not just one. It was an omnibus bill versus just we're only dealing with bail.
That's right. It did roll discovery into that as well and set some time frames and mandates that just aren't reasonable for our district attorneys and law enforcement agencies to meet.
And the resolution before the legislature, I read some of the comments, but I don't think I read what the vote was. Was it unanimously passed?
It was unanimously passed. The entire legislative body understood and recognized that we do have to go back to the table here and further reform these reforms.
So let me ask you the political question. You're an elected official. You know what the lay of the land is. Do you really think there is a chance for reform in the New York State legislature practically?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that our local legislature, and I've seen other elected officials on both sides of the aisle that have, basically said publicly that we need to go back to the table here. So for me, I don't think this should be a political issue. This is a public safety issue. And again, I don't want the appearance that I think that every person that's alleged to have committed a crime and charged should be locked up. I think that in many cases individuals should be let go because they aren't a flight risk or a risk to public safety per se, but the way it's set up now, we have some serious issues that are making our community less safe. So we all have to go back to the drawing board and fix this.
And I only ask that because the practical reality seems to me is that this changed because Democrats, and I'm not saying it's just Democrats, but Democrats took control of the state Senate. They have a majority. You'd have to get that leadership that's in the New York City area to agree to these changes before you even got to the governor's desk.
You would, but if you watch the news and you see what's going on in New York City and all across the state, it's very evident that what we're doing right now is not working.
And I think Mayor Adams, the New York City's new mayor, has asked for some changes there, and he has a law enforcement background.
Absolutely. I mean, things are a mess when it comes to public safety in New York City. We have to fix it.
Where is the governor in all this? Where's Kathy Hochul? Because obviously this was passed and signed by a previous governor. Do you know where she stands in her office?
I don't know where she stands currently on this. She's obviously running for election this year for that position, so she's certainly going to have to address this, but I haven't seen any public announcement or any public position by her on where she stands, but I'm hopeful that she recognizes that we need to go back and fix it.
So the other item that you've done in regards to the county legislature has been body cameras. What did the county legislature do?
Recently, the legislature approved my funding request to implement a body-worn camera program for our road patrol division, which I'm very excited to implement. I think this is going to be a great thing for our sheriff's deputies and for the community.
So what exactly will it do?
So we're going to purchase 33 body-worn cameras. These cameras will be worn individually by each sheriff's deputy when they're patrolling and when they're responding to incidents in our community. They'll record the entire event whenever they have public interaction.
So do they have to physically turn it on, or is it on all the time, including if they're going through a drive-through and getting an iced tea?
They will actually have to physically turn them on. That will be our policy, that every time they address an actual
And
incident.
what happens if they don't?
Well, there would certainly have to be, some...
There's a disciplinary issue.
There would be, and some additional training. From what I've been told by a number of other sheriffs, chiefs, and people that have already implemented them in their departments, is that it becomes muscle memory that whenever you get out of the car, it becomes muscle memory that you're turning that camera on.
So why do it?
For me, I think there's a lot of benefits. I think it helps us be transparent so that we can provide the community, a full recording of exactly how we've addressed an incident. I think it's the best evidence. I think it's certainly the best thing that we can provide to the district attorney's office. If we make an arrest or we witness a crime, there's no better evidence than an actual recording of that. And I think it also protects the public. If somebody in law enforcement is not doing the right thing, not following policy and procedure, we have that video to hold our members accountable.
Do you get many complaints like that?
We don't receive many complaints in the course of a year, but I'm
Because this is where I'm going with this.
sure.
This seems like you're driving this, not the county legislature, though they're supportive, nor Albany. In many cases, it's law enforcement is driving it because they've had to react to a public event. And we obviously saw that in a neighboring county. We've seen that in several neighboring counties. That doesn't seem to be the case here, correct?
We're not implementing this
You're not
program.
responding.
No, we're not, due to a specific incident that happened here. But I think it's a positive win-win for everybody in our community, including our law enforcement deputies, to have an actual accounting of what's happening out there every day on the street. And I'd like to say that our deputies are wanting to have these cameras. They're not pushing back against it.
So some of the issues with other communities that have done it has always been the red flag of cost. So how much is this going to cost?
Over the course of a 5-year period, it's going to be a little over $220,000 for the cameras, and a big part of the cost is due to data storage. So it's a phenomenal amount of video and data that would need to be stored. I opted to propose that we utilize a storage platform provided by the camera provider, so everything will be uploaded to a cloud.
So how long do you have to keep it for?
It depends, how serious the incident is. Obviously, if it was a very serious incident, we might keep it forever. If it's a traffic stop, we'll keep it for a much shorter period of time, but it really depends on the type of incident.
And some departments, one of the reasons they haven't done it is they've had to create a whole new position. That is not occurring in this case, correct? Or are you?
We are creating a new clerk's position to address the storage, the redaction, and the information that's going to have to be supplied to the district attorney's office. So it will be a full-time clerk's position that we'll create to do this.
Well, only because I want to get to two other subjects as well. This would only be for road deputies. It is not for individuals who work in the jail, correct?
Correct, just for our road patrol division.
And why not in the jail?
Well, I would love to have them in the jail. It's just it would be a phenomenal cost that we're just not in a position to fund right now.
And how many beds do you have in the jail?
We have 216 beds.
And how big is staff?
We have 96 budgeted positions.
And so you have just recently received a Department of Justice grant for $750,000 with Cayuga Counseling. What is that for?
It is for to implement a new transition program in our jail to help inmates transition from the point they are booked into our facility to the point they're released. One of my primary goals when I became sheriff, and something I've always wanted to do, is overhaul the way we address inmates while they're in our facility. I want the inmates to be better when they leave. I want to help them with their struggles, whether it's mental health or addiction, if they need some vocational training. Those
So this
types
is
of
to
things.
reduce recidivism as well.
Absolutely, that's the primary goal. But I want to help our inmates transition in a positive way, reduce recidivism, and I believe that this is going to be a key step in that direction.
So how will you be doing it?
We actually partnered with Cayuga Counseling Services of Auburn to apply for a Department of Justice grant. It was a 3-year grant to provide $750,000 over the 3 years to hire additional staff and provide some additional training, vocational services, and mental health and addiction treatment and counseling in our facility. And we were fortunate enough to be awarded that grant in partnership with Cayuga Counseling. And we're working right now with Cayuga Counseling to hire some case managers and individuals that will implement and oversee that program in our jail in partnership with our current transition counselor that we have.
So the goal would be over a 3-year period to develop a better program or a program, and then it will be sustained by taxpayers in the future after that.
We'll have to see how that goes. A part of this grant that I'm glad that we have is a research project so that we can see and track inmates after they leave and determine if it's working. So
Okay.
we'll look at this after the 3 years with this research study and determine did it prevent reoccurrence of crime, did it reduce recidivism, and then we would have to come back and determine how could we fund this in the future without the grant.
So is there a local share now?
There is no local share. It is a 3-year award that covers the full program. At the end of this 3 years, we'll look at that research study and see if it's working, and if it's had a positive impact, if it's reducing recidivism, then maybe it will be worth looking at trying to fund it locally.
I want to finish with just a couple minutes. We have 3 or 4 minutes just on the issue of marijuana because it's popped up in a couple of different formats. But I know the New York Conference of Mayors had a conference about 3 weeks ago. There was a big conversation there that Albany passed a law and there's no infrastructure in place, and it almost sounds like the state officials who addressed this agreed. Is this an issue for you and your department right now?
It is. We're starting to see black markets pop up. I wish that the state had waited until they were ready to do this to authorize the dispensaries and have the infrastructure in place.
Is
but they
it
don't.
legal to buy marijuana in Cayuga County right now?
It is legal to possess marijuana.
But not to, so you have to, so the dispensary has to be licensed.
Correct.
And are they issuing licenses yet?
They are not.
Okay. So the other question that came up at NICOM seemed to be that localities were not getting any resources. Yes, they're going to get a cut of tax revenues if they're generated, or what tax, but is there any infrastructure that the state has provided you and other municipalities here?
No, there's been nothing that's come forward yet, and we're certainly going to have to address issues, and we're already addressing them with certainly the black market marijuana that's being sold, and people driving under the influence and needing specialized training to address those issues, but we're not getting any resources to address
When when the dispensaries come on board, do you still think you'll have black market?
I believe that we will. I think looking at the other states where they've done this in the past, black market dispensaries pop up because really, if somebody can buy it without paying the taxes and buy it on the local street corner rather than spending that additional money, certainly it's going to be lucrative for a black market to pop up, and that's going to happen here.
So the Cayuga Nation, as we read yesterday, is also going to be growing marijuana commercially in Seneca Falls. Does this in essence create a concern for you and other law enforcement because there are Cayuga properties in Cayuga County?
Well, they're already selling it here, so it's certainly a concern. People are certainly already buying it.
They can buy it, so I'm assuming this is Lakeside, not that I want to give an ad.
Correct, but they are selling it already in Union Springs, and they're selling it
And
in
they're
Seneca
not
Falls.
taxed?
They're not, no.
So when these dispensaries come on board, they are going to be taxed, but the Native Americans are not.
Right.
Still a controlled substance as far as the feds are concerned?
It is.
Does that mean that your office enforces that, or is that a federal enforcement issue?
We cannot enforce federal law at our sheriff's office, so that'll be a federal issue that the federal authorities will have to address if they choose to do that. But I think they've taken a hands-off approach in most cases in other states that have already legalized it.
We have a lot more we can talk about.
Yes,
But
we
30 minutes goes very, very quickly, and we do want to thank Cayuga County Sheriff Brian SCHENCK for joining us today to discuss bail reform as well as body cameras and this new Department of Justice. We'd love to hear more about it when you come on and how it's working. and we look forward to having him come on to give us further updates. We will return in just a moment with our first Beyond the Front Page of the spring 2022 semester with Executive Director Catherine Dennis of the United Way, Cayuga County United Way, talk about their closing out their campaign and their plans to celebrate 100 years in Cayuga County. And we'll be back with another edition of Inside Government on Thursday with Cayuga County Public Health educator Deanna Hoy, who will discuss the county's efforts to reduce lead. And on Beyond the Front Page, as we mentioned a little earlier with the sheriff, HEAL Project Director Monica Salvage will give us an update on HEAL and the study that's being done, as well as local overdose trends. Over the next month, we do have a number of guests already booked to come into the studio. New York State Senator Pamela Helming will be here, Assemblyman Brian McDelow, as well as Cayuga County Legislative Chairman David Gould will be back in the studio. Community College President Brian Durant will be here to give a college update, talk about some developments that will be occurring this spring. We'll have Cayuga County's new Director of Veteran Services, Kevin Swab, on. Auburn Police Department Police Chief James Sladen will be here next Tuesday. Stephanie Hutchinson of the Auburn Housing Authority, as well as Melissa Kartner of the YMCA will be here, and we will end this semester with Jeff Parazola and Lisa Green to talk about Auburn's proposed budget that will go before voters in May. And then we will also be having our Auburn Enlarged School District Forum and that is scheduled right now for May 3rd. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know you can still suggest guests or questions for guests on thoughts that you have on this show for either Inside Government or Beyond the Front Page. You can send your questions to cozguytho@aol.com or Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cayuga Community College. We hope you're safe, well, keep masked up if you can, and stick around for another edition of Beyond the Front Page in just a moment with the United Way.